Morning. Thanks so much for having me. Actually, it's been a long time since I've talked in front of so many people. I was sort of off the speaking circuit for a number of years, busy with a young family. So it's a real honor to be kicking it off again in New Orleans here at Collision. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So I work at Adobe. My title is Principal Designer. And my job is working with designers, working with customers, learning what they want, what new challenges they face, and also working with the designers at Adobe who are working on the tools that you guys are familiar with, Photoshop, Illustrator. Right now, I'm focused on Adobe XD, which is our new UX UI design and prototyping tool. It's out in public beta right now. You don't need a Creative Cloud account to give it a try. I'm really proud of it. It's a whole new approach to design, incredibly fast for designing and prototyping in the same space. We really think this is a design platform for the next few decades. You may know me from, this is a look at the XD interface. You may know me from past lives where I used to be design director at NewYorkTimes.com for a number of years. I've also blogged for 17 years, which is crazy, at Subtraction.com. I write about design, about technology, culture, film, all sorts of things. And one of the things that happens when you write for so long publicly, when you put your thoughts on the public record like that, is inevitably you will say things that you come to regret. And that's sort of where I want to start today's story. Saying things you might regret. And I'm going to sort of touch on a couple of incidences from my past where I said things that I later wish I kind of hadn't said. A few years ago, before I joined Adobe, Airbnb released a new logo, a new identity system, and it was met with a fair amount of criticism, really snarky criticism over some of the sort of suggestive shapes in the logo. And a lot of people chimed in on this, and I did as well. I'm not proud of doing so, but I said some funny things about the logo. Jump a couple of years ahead. I'm working at Adobe. We're at Adobe Max, which takes place every fall. It's actually our annual conference for creative pros. It's actually a great experience if you get a chance to go. And we invite on stage a customer, a really special customer, who are going to give a testimonial about Adobe XD and are going to talk about how they love using it, how their team has switched over to it, and how it's really allowed them to do a new kind of design. And that customer is, of course, Airbnb. So that was a really awkward moment for me because here's Alan Mask from Airbnb on stage with Paul Gabay, the vice president at Adobe who works on our new design tools. I work with him really closely. And I got really hot under the collar thinking back on how I had said some not very becoming things about Airbnb before. And now they're a really important partner to us, and we really like working with them a lot. When you write a design blog, you also write a lot about Apple. And in the past, I've said lots of things about Apple, lots of complimentary things, lots of things that were critical. A lot of that I think was really well argued, but there were some moments when I was ranting or just saying things that were not particularly well argued. Of course, Apple is a big partner of Adobe. And last year, while I was working at Adobe, I woke up one day to find that Farhad Manjoo, who's tech columnist at the New York Times, had reached back into time to one of my old blog posts and picked out a not very complimentary remark that I had to say about Apple design at the time. And that really gave me heartburn that day because, as I said, they're a really important partner to us. We really enjoy working with them. Here's my colleague Eric Snowden on stage at the iPad Pro announcement last year, the year before. They're great to us. We do terrific things. And it really made me think, I should really be careful what I say online. I have all these relationships in the industry now, and I have these partnerships that my employer is engaged in that are really important. Sort of goes back to that adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And as I've grown up, I've really found this to be more and more true, not just for design, but for every profession. But for design particularly, we're a fairly small, tight-knit community. Everybody kind of knows each other. We have lots of relationships that propel us, that open up doors and opportunities for us. And that's wonderful, but at the same time, these relationships end up entangling us as well. They basically make it really difficult for us to talk openly and honestly and deeply about design. It essentially undermines our ability to have a really healthy discourse and for design criticism to really reach its full maturity. So I want to talk a little bit about what gets written about design today, out there on the internet mostly. One of the great things about our community is that we're willing to share. We're willing to write lots of articles about what we do, what we're thinking, how we do it, how we manage to pull off some seemingly impossible feat. And that's terrific, but I don't think it's good enough. I don't think it fully covers everything that we need to be talking about as a community. If you look back in recent design history, when analog design was at its peak, we had all these great outlets for design journalism, design criticism. These are all gone now. Emigre, ID, Critique, except for I Magazine out of London. They're still doing an amazing job. I encourage everybody to read that magazine. But these outlets are gone, and what we have today is Medium. If you're going to write an article about design, or you're going to write anything about design, chances are you're going to come to the conclusion that Medium is the right place to post it. That's what we've decided as a community. And there are many great things about Medium. I don't mean to take away from their success. But if you look at what gets bubbled up on Medium, it's articles about advancing your skills or getting ahead in your career, articles about how to execute or how to pull off specific design implementations, superficial articles about trends in the industry, articles that don't dig very deep, or rants, just somebody who has an axe to grind or had a really bad day and wants to comment on some aspect of design. And you look further afield too on Designer News, which is a great site. I visit it every day. I think it's a terrific resource. Mostly what you see here are things that people are trying to promote, whether they're trying to promote their product or their portfolio or a new idea or a job opening they're trying to fill. It's not design criticism. It doesn't really look deeply at design. And the reason for all of this is the stuff that gets posted on Medium and Designer News is stuff that's written by us, by designers, by people who are practicing design at the same time as they're thinking about it and talking about it. And what we lack and what we need is a class of knowledgeable professionals whose job it is to think critically about design. And if you think about it, this is a key part of every art form that reaches critical mass, that really gets out there and becomes popular. You think about architecture. This is Michael Kimmelman. He nearly won a Pulitzer Prize for writing about architecture. Architecture is a kind of design. He's incredibly well respected. He works for the New York Times. His job is to think about architecture. If you want to go to a more populist route, you think about film critics, about Siskel and Ebert. Their job was every week to talk about movies, talk about the ideas behind movies, about their context, about their impact on culture. Now, if you think about if they were also film directors or film producers, or if Michael Kimmelman was a practicing architect and he was building buildings at the same time, you come to one of two conclusions. One, either these critics aren't very serious, or two, this art form is not very serious. But that's the situation that we have today. We have people who are practicing and critiquing design, and there's value in that, but we lack people who don't have this inherent conflict of interest. And it's independence. This independence is really essential for helping us get to the next level, in my view. So it's worth asking the question, why is design criticism important? And you could build a whole argument about this, and I think we should have a really, really big discussion about it, but I'm going to offer only one reason today. And that reason is because we essentially asked for it to be important. We've been talking about how important design is for the past 10 or 15 years and arguing over and over again that we make incredible contributions to the success of businesses and companies. We've been arguing for design's place alongside tech and alongside business, for a seat at the table. But we talk a lot less about design's responsibility when things go wrong. So here are a few examples. You think about Twitter, fantastic IPO, over the past several years, they've really struggled. During that time, they've hired tons of designers and produced tons of design work. Is there some causation here or just correlation? I don't know. I think it's worth looking at, though. When you hire so many designers and put so much design effort and thought towards building a cultural phenomenon, what happens? We don't really know the answer to that. Think about Facebook and their challenges getting people out of their bubble or with the propagation of fake news. Can you imagine for a second if the situation were reversed and Facebook were able to say, hey, we get people out of their bubbles and we're successful in exposing them to different ideas and having a positive impact on culture, you know that design would be there claiming some of the credit. But the opposite is the case, and we talk about Facebook's problems as literally as a bug, as a technical shortcoming. And I feel like design should be part of this conversation. Here's a really painful example if you voted for Hillary like I did. There was a tremendous amount of design that went into this campaign. And for me particularly, I'm friends with Jennifer Kinnan, who is the creative director of Hillary for America. Again, going back to the idea that we're all entangled. I think she and her team did an amazing job, and they deserve tons of credit. But the outcome of this election, you could argue, the ramifications are going to be with us for decades and decades. What role did design play in the loss that Clinton experienced in November? I don't know if there was any, but I do know that in 2008, when Obama won, design was really ready to take credit for that beautiful logo and all of the wonderful design work that was a part of that campaign. So we've really been waging a multi-decade campaign for credibility. But really, to get to the next stage, we need to embrace rigor and accountability, and I really feel like design criticism is an important part of that. So, to be honest, we're not going to get a design critic full-time at the New York Times anytime soon. We're not going to get a whole class of people whose job it is just to think about design. In the meantime, I thought I would offer a few things that we can think about when we encounter what passes for design writing out there today. First, we shouldn't mistake writing about technology and business as writing about design or talking about design. The first two people are very comfortable talking about. Design criticism is much more of an unknown, and it's really about the decisions that designers make and their context and their implications. And so when you encounter anything written about design out there, you can ask yourself, who wrote it? What's it saying? How is it being said, and how effective is it? And I'll run through this really quickly. When you ask who wrote something, you're essentially asking what are their credentials and what are their biases? Are there any undisclosed relationships at play? And what do they have to gain by communicating this message or writing this article? And then what is the article saying? Like, what is the central message? And how is the writer constructing that message? Are they using facts and figures that can be independently verified? Are there sources that are cited? And is there a context provided beyond just the writer's personal experience? A lot of what gets written out there comes from a designer having gone through an experience and then automatically universalizing it and assuming that it's true for everybody. How is it being said? Is the language reasonable and thoughtful, or is it hyperbolic and over the top? Are there leaps of logic that are actually supported in the argument? Is there a lot of jargon or technical terminology that is maybe intended to make you feel not as smart as the writer, even though that may not be the case? And are there opposing points of view that are being represented? And finally, maybe the most important question is, like, how effective is it? Like, even if you don't find an argument persuasive or you don't agree with it, do you still find it valuable? Does it challenge your assumptions? And did you learn something new from it? So finally, I want to close with this last thought, that a lot of people think design criticism is just like throwing crap at people who are working really hard to produce good work. A lot of people assume this is what a critic is, somebody who likes to sit around every day, not exercising, and just delighting in other people's failure. And I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, some of this is true, of course, but the way I think about design criticism, I actually think it's inherently optimistic because it imagines a better world and it thinks really deeply about how we can get there. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.